Every spring, the same pattern repeats itself across garden centers and nursery aisles. Gardeners arrive with lists: fertilizer for stronger roots, liquid nutrients for faster growth, fungicide for healthier soil, rooting hormone for new cuttings, pest spray for leaf protection. They fill their carts with bottles, bags, and concentrated powders, each product promising one specific function, each label listing precise chemical formulas, and each purchase requiring replacement season after season. The system works. Plants grow, problems diminish, gardens produce, but the cost accumulates quietly. The average home gardener spends between $300 and $500 each year on fertilizers and pest control alone. And the real cost appears in the soil itself, where most of these products deliver nutrients in forms that bypass the biological systems soil depends on. Microbes decline, organic matter decreases, and each season requires more input to achieve the same results. Yet somewhere in that same garden center, often near the checkout aisle or tucked beside the houseplants, sits a small succulent in a plastic pot. Aloe vera, $2, maybe $3. Most people walk past it without a second glance, and if they buy it at all, they take it home for sunburn relief or skin care. What they do not realize is that inside those thick, pale green leaves lies nearly everything they just purchased in bottles. Minerals that strengthen roots and power photosynthesis, natural growth hormones that signal cell division and expansion, and antimicrobial compounds that protect against fungal disease and soil pathogens. One plant, one time, and it multiplies on its own. This is not new information. This knowledge is more than 6,000 years old, and it was working perfectly until modern agriculture decided it was more profitable to make you forget it. The ancient Egyptians called aloe vera the plant of immortality, not because it granted eternal life, but because it sustained life season after season without depletion. Around 4000 BC, temple engravings in Egypt depicted aloe as a sacred plant given to pharaohs and used in burial rituals, while the Ebers Papyrus from 1534 BC documents applications for wounds, skin conditions, and soil preparation. Even earlier, a Sumerian clay tablet from 2200 BC records aloe as a treatment for illness and a substance applied to growing fields. The Greeks documented it in their medical texts. The Romans carried it on warships to sustain food supplies during long campaigns, and Chinese physicians cataloged it in herbal medicine records that stretch back thousands of years. Across continents, across centuries, across entirely different agricultural systems, the same plant appeared again and again because it worked, not as a luxury or supplement, but as a fundamental tool for maintaining fertility and protecting crops. For most of human history, farmers worked with what the land provided, and aloe, in regions where it grew or could be cultivated, became one of those materials. A plant that required almost nothing but gave back concentrated biological value. Then something changed. Not because aloe stopped working, but because agriculture itself transformed into something that could no longer accommodate it. To understand why aloe disappeared from agriculture and why it is beginning to return, you first need to understand what is actually inside that leaf. Cut open a single mature aloe leaf, and a clear, thick gel flows out, looking almost like water that has been slightly thickened. But that translucent substance contains a concentrated collection of minerals that reads like the ingredient list on a fertilizer bag. Calcium, magnesium, potassium, zinc, iron, copper, and manganese, all present in forms that living systems can recognize and absorb. Calcium strengthens cell walls and allows plant tissues to expand without collapsing. Magnesium sits at the center of every chlorophyll molecule, making it essential for photosynthesis. And potassium regulates water movement through plant cells and controls how efficiently sugars travel from leaves to roots and developing fruits. These are the same primary nutrients that fertilizer companies extract, refine, and sell in concentrated chemical forms. But minerals alone do not explain what makes aloe unusual as a biological input. In 2025, researchers using liquid chromatography and mass spectrometry identified 6 distinct phytohormones present in aloe vera gel: gibberellic acid, indole, 3-acetic acid, salicylic acid, abscisic acid, and 2 forms of cytokinin. natural plant growth regulators that amplify processes plants already use to regulate their own growth. Gibberellic acid promotes cell elongation and stem growth. Indole 3-acetic acid stimulates root hair formation and encourages roots to explore larger volumes of soil. And salicylic acid functions as a stress response signal that helps plants activate defense mechanisms when they encounter environmental pressure or pathogen threats. Then there are the antimicrobial compounds, particularly saponins, which have been documented in multiple peer-reviewed studies for their ability to disrupt fungal cell membranes and inhibit bacterial growth, with whole leaf extracts showing inhibition rates above 35% in controlled laboratory conditions. When aloe solution enters the soil, 3 distinct processes begin almost immediately. Minerals dissolve gradually into the soil solution and become available to plant roots. Growth hormones interact with root tissues, and leaf cells triggering responses that mirror the plant's own internal signaling pathways. And antimicrobial compounds create a protective chemical environment around root zones that reduces the ability of pathogenic fungi to establish colonies. This is not a single-function input like a bottle of nitrogen fertilizer or a targeted fungicide. It is a multi-layered biological interaction that addresses several limiting factors simultaneously, and the plant integrates it through metabolic pathways that have existed for millions of years, responding as it would to ideal growing conditions rather than to synthetic intervention. The results appear gradually: deeper root systems, stronger stems, faster recovery from transplant stress, and reduced incidence of fungal disease, not dramatic overnight transformations, but consistent, cumulative improvements that build resilient plant systems rather than creating temporary dependency on external inputs. For most of agricultural history, farmers worked with materials they could access locally, and aloe required almost no maintenance, multiplied through offsets that appeared around the base of mature plants, and provided concentrated biological value that could be applied directly to soil or diluted into irrigation water. But during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, agriculture began transforming in ways that would eventually make plants like aloe incompatible with the emerging industrial model. Chemists discovered how to extract nitrogen from the atmosphere, mine phosphorus from ancient geological deposits, and refine potassium salts from underground mineral reserves, creating fertilizers that could be produced in factories, stored indefinitely, and shipped across continents without degradation. These new inputs had undeniable advantages. They contained precise, measurable concentrations of nutrients. They performed identically regardless of climate or season, and they could be applied uniformly across thousands of hectares using machinery designed for granular or liquid chemicals. As farms grew larger and agricultural systems became increasingly mechanized, the demand for standardization intensified, and anything that could not fit into that framework gradually disappeared from mainstream practice. Aloe could not meet those requirements, not because it was inferior as a biological input, but because it was fundamentally incompatible with the logic of industrial-scale agriculture. Every aloe plant varies slightly in mineral composition depending on soil conditions and maturity. The gel cannot be stored for months without refrigeration, and it cannot be applied using equipment designed for synthetic fertilizers. From the perspective of large-scale farming systems built around predictability and efficiency, aloe was not a viable option, and as chemical fertilizers became the standard, the knowledge of biological alternatives slowly faded from agricultural education and farming manuals. This was not a conspiracy to suppress useful knowledge. It was economic selection favoring products that could be manufactured, packaged, and sold repeatedly. Today, the global fertilizer market exceeds $240 billion annually, with projections showing continued growth toward $280 billion by 2030. While the pesticide industry adds another $45 to $90 billion, depending on how market segments are calculated. These are massive economic systems that feed billions of people and support industrial agriculture on a scale that would have been unimaginable a century ago. But for home gardeners and small-scale growers, the same economic logic that makes sense for 1,000-hectare farms creates a different kind of problem. The average home gardener now spends between $300 and $500 each year on fertilizers, soil amendments, and pest control products that must be replaced every season, while a single aloe vera plant costs $2 to $5 at most nurseries, requires watering once per week, and produces between 3 and 8 offsets each year that can be separated and replanted to expand coverage across an entire garden. Within 2 years, one plant becomes a self-sustaining system that provides the same minerals, growth hormones, and antimicrobial compounds sold in bottles with a maintenance cost of essentially zero. The knowledge of how to use it never disappeared completely. It survived in traditional farming communities, permaculture networks, and among gardeners who learned from older generations, but it remained invisible to mainstream agriculture and largely absent from the gardening advice promoted by companies whose business models depend on repeat purchases. In recent years, something has begun shifting in how gardeners and small-scale farmers think about soil fertility and plant health, driven not by nostalgia for traditional methods but by practical concerns about input costs, soil degradation, and the long-term sustainability of systems that require constant external supplementation. The regenerative agriculture movement, which has gained significant momentum over the past decade, asks a fundamental question. How did ecosystems maintain fertility and resist disease for millions of years before synthetic inputs existed? That question has led researchers, permaculture practitioners, and home gardeners back toward biological materials that were once common in traditional agriculture, but disappeared as industrial methods became dominant. And aloe vera has reappeared in that conversation, not as a miracle solution, but as one tool among many for rebuilding soil systems that can regulate themselves rather than depending entirely on purchased products. Studies published in agricultural journals now document what traditional farmers already knew: aloe leaf waste, when incorporated into soil or applied as diluted liquid extract, improves plant growth, increases microbial activity, and supports soil fertility in organic farming systems. While permaculture forums and gardening networks report successful use of aloe gel as a rooting hormone for cuttings, with documented results for plants like lavender, rosemary, and passionflower showing root establishment rates comparable to synthetic rooting powders. These are not dramatic transformations that happen overnight. They are gradual, cumulative improvements that build resilient systems rather than creating temporary growth spurts followed by decline. For gardeners who want to experiment with aloe as a fertilizer and pest management tool, the process is straightforward and requires almost no specialized equipment or technical knowledge. Start by obtaining a single aloe vera plant, specifically the variety known as Aloe barbadensis Miller, which is available at most nurseries and garden centers for between $2 and $5. Then plant it in well-draining soil in a location that receives full sun or bright indirect light, and water it approximately once per week, allowing the soil to dry completely between waterings since aloe stores water in its leaves and tolerates drought far better than overwatering. Once the plant has established itself and produced several mature outer leaves, you can begin harvesting for garden use by cutting one thick leaf at the base with a clean knife, then blending that leaf with 1 liter of water until the mixture becomes smooth and uniform. This concentrated aloe liquid should then be diluted further at a ratio of 1 part aloe solution to 10 parts water before being applied to soil or plants, creating a gentle biological input that will not shock root systems or burn leaf tissues. Apply this diluted solution as a soil drench around the base of plants every 2 weeks during the growing season, or use it as a foliar spray by misting it directly onto leaves in the early morning or late afternoon, when temperatures are cooler and the liquid will not evaporate before being absorbed. For pest management, add approximately 5 drops of neem oil per liter of diluted aloe solution. Shake the mixture thoroughly, and spray it on plants showing signs of insect damage, or apply it preventatively around the perimeter of garden beds, reapplying every 7 to 10 days or after heavy rainfall since the coating washes off and needs to be renewed. When transplanting seedlings, soak the roots in undiluted aloe water mixture for 20 minutes before placing them in the ground, which reduces transplant shock and accelerates the establishment of new root systems by providing growth hormones directly to root tissues at the moment when they are most vulnerable to stress. It is important to understand what aloe is not. It is not a complete replacement for every fertilizer or pest control method. It will not repair severely depleted soil on its own, and it works best as part of a broader system that includes compost, organic matter, and attention to the biological networks that regulate nutrient cycling beneath the surface. But what it does offer is a reminder that the materials gardeners purchase in bottles often exist in concentrated form within living systems that can be grown, maintained, and propagated without recurring costs or dependency on external supply chains. The $2 plant sitting in a nursery aisle contains minerals that strengthen roots and power photosynthesis, natural growth hormones that signal cell division and tissue expansion, and antimicrobial compounds that protect against fungal pathogens and bacterial disease. Ancient Egyptians recognized this more than 6,000 years ago when they called aloe the plant of immortality, not because it granted eternal life, but because it sustained agricultural systems season after season without depletion or decline. Modern industrial agriculture chose a different path, one built on standardization, scalability, and products that could be manufactured in factories and sold repeatedly. And that system has fed billions of people and supported global food production on a scale that traditional methods could never have achieved alone. But the choice to prioritize industrial inputs also created a kind of forgetting, where knowledge that did not fit the new model gradually disappeared from agricultural education, extension services, and mainstream gardening advice. That knowledge never vanished completely. It survived in traditional farming communities, permaculture networks, and among gardeners who learned from previous generations. And now, as more people seek ways to rebuild soil health rather than simply feeding plants, that knowledge is returning. Not as a replacement for everything modern agriculture has built, but as a reminder that abundance and resilience do not always require a purchase, and that some of the most valuable tools for growing food have been waiting quietly at the margins, ready to multiply on their own, asking for almost nothing while offering nearly everything a garden needs to thrive. One plant, $2, and the biological memory of 6,000 years.